Welcome to Bit by Bit. I am joined by my ever on the road colleague, Carolina Milanesi. Hello, Carolina.
Hi, it was good to see you in person earlier today
In
on
person. You're in another hotel room, but this time
yes.
San Jose, back from Computex with all of the joy that was. And we were both at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. And the big news from today was what Apple is doing in artificial intelligence, even though they used that term maybe three times. There was lots of other terms they liked to use, like machine learning
Yep,
and
algorithm.
algorithm, and obviously the big cat's out of the bag. Apple's calling this Apple Intelligence. So we thought we would start with how we view Apple's implementation with this within their core philosophies. This was talked about in the session at WWDC around Apple Intelligence, and then also in a Q&A that we sat in afterwards, where I feel like there's a couple core principles that it's worth us hitting on that Apple really wanted to focus and get out there to everybody. So let's talk about Apple Intelligence and some of the core principles and philosophies that Apple's embracing that's core to their values, and really let's sort of dig into Apple's implementing this in a very Apple-y way. So what does that mean as we interpret it? You go first.
Yeah, I think that the name itself, Apple Intelligence, aside from, being a bit grandiose, it really encapsulates the principle that Apple has and how they're thinking about AI. And I think it makes a very good distinction between what is theirs and what isn't, because obviously they also um, have launched the partnership with OpenAI and ChatGPT. But I think at the core of it, we've seen that is about privacy, as you would expect, because that's what Apple talks about all the time. It is about making it useful for the user, so meaningful to the user. And then is about seamless delivery, which means that it goes across the platform, across the device, and across the ecosystem. It's not just one or two functionalities, within your experience. So I was trying to pull up all the terms that they use, but it really that's what it is personal, it's
Mm-hmm.
contextual. So the data that they have and how much they know the user helps deliver an AI experience that is tailored to me. So it's not something generic. And I think that that's where, in my opinion, the very, differentiated approach between what they're delivering with their homegrown Apple intelligence versus an external model.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway as I think a lot of people anticipated was how would they keep their fundamental promise and stance on privacy and security and bring that to an AI model. And we both know for years we've followed this narrative that people have said, well, when it comes to AI, Apple's hamstringing themselves or handcuffing themselves because they're just limiting themselves to anonymized data, which how great can you
Right.
train a model with anonymized data? And then two, with their on-device privacy approach, they're not going to be able to do core compute, core cloud compute, and provide some of these more rich models. And so they obviously addressed both of those things, right? They showed us one fairly robust foundational models that Apple has trained that's both in the large language models, small language model, semantic index, and then obviously image generation. So there's a lot of components relative to how they're doing diffusion models for imagery, to do Genmoji, to do some of the Gen AI art image stuff. So these are all Apple models, right? So I think one, we look at that and say, okay, they have trained a lot of this. They have their own models. They're not reliant on somebody else to provide
That's right.
large language, foundational models, small language models, and even diffusion models. And then from there, they've doubled down on a lot of this is happening on device, right? Using a small language model, just like Microsoft uses with Windows to do a lot of that inference. So a lot of the stuff that they're doing around summarizations of emails, summarizations of notifications, etc., is just real small language stuff, which I believe they said was in the 3 billion parameter range. But again, all Apple's models, all on device, all stuff never that Apple never sees. And the reason I think you mentioned personal intelligence is I think we have to embrace that Apple's investing in the personal intelligence side of this, not the general intelligence side of this. And
That's
I think
right.
those are the distinction is very important because I think, we had talked about this a long time ago in either a number of shows or blog posts that we did where Apple's really just trying to create for you the best personal assistant possible that knows
Yeah.
you intimately and provides value. Now, that was very hard for them to do. And now we're seeing the first fruits of this work and this manifestation based on a much more natural, language type of an interface. And then they include into this their secure cloud compute, where clearly Apple is leveraging data centers that they have. They do a lot in
With the
co-location
silicon.
facilities, right? But this they're doing just in their housed data centers with Apple Silicon. And I think the right way to think about that is they're able to close this loop between cloud for large language models and on device. And both of those have the same level of security. That even
That's
if it
right.
goes to this cloud, it's still going to keep you anonymized. It's still going to use that large language model access that it needs, but it's still able to keep it private and unique for you because Apple kind of has this unique semantic profile on device. So I look at that and say they now have what many people kind of criticize them on is that they didn't have a big cloud because they were relying on other people's clouds. They now are not relying on anybody for their LLMs and their diffusion models and their SLMs. And they're not relying on anybody for the cloud part of this, which I think really nails down the philosophy that we kind of expected to see core to Apple's values here.
And I think they do it in a smart way where they are using their cloud, which obviously is not as big as, Google and Microsoft or Amazon, to do the work that matters, right? To do the work that is going to bring me the differentiator and personalization that I require versus doing the generic queries that consume a lot of compute power and will need, different kind of training, different kind of data, and a much bigger buildup for Apple to do. And that at the end, it's something that is very transactional with the user and doesn't really create the same level of I guess almost gut feel relationship with the company, right? I can use ChatGPT or Gemini to ask about what the weather is in California, and I don't feel strongly about one or the other. Versus if I'm asking something very personal that depends on my personal data, and I get the right answer, my affinity and my engagement with that entity, whatever is Siri or one of the devices that I'm using, is much deeper.
Right, right. So let's get into some of the details of the implementation because I do think there's been a little bit of confusion out here about some of all the things that like what is Apple Intelligence? How does that manifest itself on devices? Maybe we'll just talk a couple of examples of that. And then kind of the big confusing point because everybody was assuming that all of this would be powered by OpenAI and it turns out that very little of it is powered to none of Apple Intelligence or personal intelligence is powered by OpenAI, but there is a way that you can use ChatGPT, and some apps have some integration opportunities via APIs with that. So let's start with Apple, sort of the details of the implementation part, and maybe let's dig into some of the differences between the ChatGPT relationship that I think is being misunderstood.
Well, I think that maybe the best example to understand the difference between the two was done in Mail, where Apple has smart replies, has editing functionality, has tone, where you can ask to have a more formal tone or business tone. Very similar things that we have seen Microsoft do with Copilot and Google do with Duet. What you've seen though, that cleaning and improving your language and your writing skills then is also has a chat GPT component if you want to create something from scratch. So in that case, you will have, as part of your pop-up, the option to say, do you want to ask chat GPT, and I can't speak anymore, and you have that option. It is interesting to me that Apple is being very transparent, and I think rightly so, to tell you when you're using ChatGPT versus when you're using Apple Intelligence, where you don't even know. It just happens, and it has a little logo, which is the new Siri logo. But that's the the big difference. I also think that another part of the implementation where it really shines is Siri now, because Siri has become more of a system personal assistant instead of a voice assistant. They changed the logo, and I know it seems silly, right? Instead of having the really round logo at the bottom of your iPhone, now you have almost like a halo that is all around the screen. But that's because Siri now is smarter thanks to the information that is throughout the device. So Siri can pick up everything now, has that context of everything you do on device to become more useful than it was in the past.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I was thinking about was, so I'll be curious of your thoughts on this too. Most people, and you and I had done numerous studies and then we stopped doing them because they got supremely boring on voice assistants. And we
Yes.
found regularly that, like, basically what do people do with their smart assistants? They say, set a timer, set a calendar appointment, set my alarm for 6:30. Like, it's the most basic of voice automation of tasks, right? So this now changes because this is not just
Yes.
voice automation. This is a way to interact with an agent with a natural language and now actually have it take a lot more action than before. So I feel like the
Yep.
same fundamental principle is there. Use my voice to do an action, but the vast number of actions, and I'm using this term like this, but the vast number of actions that I have access to is just much, much, much wider and deeper. Now, here's the question. Most people, I think, have lost faith in Siri. So how does Apple get people back to use this, trust this, try new ways when really, I think, sadly, and I'm sorry anyone Apple is for saying this, most people have been burned by Siri regular times, and so their trust of level isn't at high. So you kind of need to regain that trust, and I'm curious how Apple does that, and this new Siri can become all what we hope.
I wonder if, and they haven't spoken about this, so we're totally kind of making it up as you ask the question. But I wonder if there are ways where they can start leading us to water in terms of one of the example that they gave was a picture and asking Siri, "Hey Siri, make this picture." I don't even know whether they actually do that. You have to say that. I don't think you have a prompt to say, "Make this picture pop."
Mm-hmm.
And the picture was basically the magic wand that you have in photos. It just made it, brighter. I wonder if there's a point in time where you're trying to do that and you will have a pop-up that says, hey, you can do this with your voice, or you can just ask. They need to your point, I think they need to surface some of this, right? Because otherwise, how do you find out what you can ask and what you can't ask? Like there was an address in a message, and you
Right,
can say add this address to Ben's contact card.
right, right,
Well, how do I know that that is one of the things that Siri can actually do?
yeah,
But in a way, I think about it, and I don't know how many people actually use shortcuts today, but I do think that this kind of replaces shortcuts, right? Is you have the ability now. I could have asked the same thing, but it would have taken me, to build a shortcut to say to Siri, okay, every time you see an address in a message, add that to the person that I'm messaging with, or whatever it is that you wanted to do with a shortcut. Now that is replaced by the voice, which I think is the right way of doing it, because I don't know how many people were investing time in creating shortcuts. The burden was still in the, on the user to
Right.
create and do that. But yeah, Discover is going to be interesting for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this just stems from like, again, you think about early access to just ChatGPT, right? And its simplicity. It took you a while to figure out what you could do. You were just stuck with the prompt and you're sitting there kind of going like, what do I do with this thing? And so it will be interesting. And that's why I think there's a couple of core examples. We talked about this, when after we saw it, Genmoji is going to be one of those things where everybody does this and probably does it regularly. Like, and I say this because coming from the perspective that the vast majority of people do not use generative AI on a daily basis at all, let alone a weekly or a monthly basis. You're all of a sudden going to have millions of people using generative AI because they want the most randomest, clever ideas of Genmojis. So Apple's really going to bring AI to the mainstream very quickly with some of these features. But that's a defined, like, what it is. That's not like tweak your mind discovery. It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of other things where Apple may have to expose those features, or they'll have to find ways to figure out how to put those workflows. And that's what makes this all interesting, because we are talking about, I think, the right paradigm of helping people use computers in richer ways with a new user interface metaphor, very similar to the GUI was. You went from a text-based, I had to type it in, to a visual interface. We're now moving to a natural language interface. And so I think it's fundamentally powerful in that context. But at the same time, you kind of have to go through this learning curve again of, well, how do I get all the value out of that, even if it's there. So that'll be an interesting one.
I do think that there, if it works, and obviously we haven't tried any of that, but the example that they gave about the interaction with Siri, where the voice is much more natural, so you can correct yourself if you said something wrong, or there's context, so you don't have to repeat yourself. Some of the things that we've seen from Alexa as well, that are there to make that interaction simpler, and that was one of the big hurdles with Siri and any other assistants before, that you had to speak in a certain way, and if you
Right.
forgot that what was your prompt, things wouldn't happen. And so there's this part as well that seemed to be improved quite considerably.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and again, I think so. So just going back into some of these implementations, right? Apple's taking, Apple Intelligence powers all of these kind of very deeply personal intelligence experiences, and then that's woven deeply into integrated deeply into the device ecosystem. And what makes this attractive is a couple different things. Is one, Apple has the largest breadth and depth of devices, right? It's going to come to WatchOS, Vision OS, and even though it's not Vision OS yet, it will come to Vision OS, obviously. iOS, iPad OS, Mac OS, TVs, right, etc. So they've got this huge depth that others don't have, and they're really focusing on the individual user of that. And I think they've made an even stronger case for their ecosystem, which I think is interesting, because now sort of looking like, well, what does this mean for competitors? Not everybody has all the pieces that Apple has at scale with their user base. And really, one of the other interesting parts of this is, does AI, like, let's say you get really into AI and all of these features, do you then start wanting more Apple devices, right? Because we know the average ownership globally is like 1.5 devices, meaning that the vast majority of people just own an iPhone. So Apple's, I think, making a really strong case that if you like all this stuff, it's really easy to use. It's an even better continuity and ecosystem. So buy a Mac, get an iPad, like get another device that you didn't have before, because you're now so. My point is, does this personal intelligence thing lead to people having more than 1.5, right? Maybe getting two devices. Does it make a stronger case for the depth of their hardware?
Personally, I think it does. There are a couple of things. One is because, trust plays a big role with AI in general. And if Apple is already a trusted brand and they continue to be trusted with generative AI, who else are consumers comfortable giving their data to? I think the second probably brand, if we stand by, a survey that we did a couple of years ago, is Microsoft, and then after that is Google, and then last was Meta. Um, so I think that it does bring people to look more across. And I think aside from generative AI, Apple also talked about iPhone mirroring on the Mac. That is another example of two products that come together closer in the way that they operate. But what is interesting though is that at the same time, we've seen Apple open up, especially on iOS, quite a bit on the look and feel of the device, which is something that they haven't done before. The idea that now I can change the home keys to
Right.
whatever it is I want instead of having the camera and the torch as the default, um, is something that, to be honest with you, it was like one of when pigs fly. Like, it's not something that I thought Apple will ever do. But of course, who cares? Like, it's not like you're, from an Apple perspective, having those two keys are not something that brings value to them or locks somebody in a certain way. So I think that giving some concessions maybe to developers to take advantage of that and then allow the consumer to choose what they want the look and feel to be speaks to more personalization
Right.
and more flexibility in what you're doing, which I'm sure, even if it's not designed for that, might actually be something that, somebody that is looking at antitrust or anything else might seem to feel less strongly about how controlling Apple is in their ecosystem.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And I really do wonder. Well, and I think this broader theme of which you hit on with just the deeper customizations of just more personalization and really again bringing more of this optionality into their ecosystem, is a part of that, right? It's delivering people, their customers, what they want with the value that they want within their broader ecosystem.
Yeah, it would have been very hypocritical of them to talk about, oh, we want to, give you more personalization on generative AI, but hey, but you can't change the way your home screens look,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the theme, by and large, is interesting. So lastly, when we look sort of forward, right? A lot of this. So did Apple do enough to convince people to want the latest and greatest? Because saying it's only coming to iPhone 15 Pro is a pretty limited group of people, US only. So one would assume that all the iPhones in the fall have this capability because they'll have the chip that's in iPhone 15 Pro, and they'll have obviously a new one. Um, the question being, right, what's coming? We don't like this term super cycle. It's fake. It's a myth. But is there a case that more people will see some of this stuff and go, yeah, I'll upgrade a little sooner, and we see some momentum come to iPhones, or are these things people are still maybe not convinced that they should care?
I do think that so Apple is rolling out on English speaking countries, right? Which also, I would say US, UK, those are the markets that have been talking a lot about generative AI. I think, in emerging markets, things are not as I don't think you're talking about generative AI in quite the same way, just because of our technology is thought of and in other countries because of GDPR and privacy issues. But in general, I do think that, to be honest, I do think a lot of people just upgrade for the Gemoji. Like I know it sounds trivial, but we see it time and time again that people upgrade for the silliest things, right? A
Yeah.
color or a
Yeah.
little redesign on the hardware side. So I do think that there's going to be um, definitely some. some drivers around the fun stuff that Apple has
Totally.
demonstrated. But then there's the other part is also that everything is free because Apple does monetize from the hardware. And so when you're looking at, if you're looking at a Mac, let's move from the phone to the Mac, and you're looking at the Mac and you have all of this for free versus an AI PC that comes priced similarly, but then I need to, if I want to have all the features, I need to look at a subscription for, some of the services that Copilot offers. Then you start to think about, okay, well, maybe, I'll consider this instead of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I sort of was talking to a couple in the media, and I said the fun, kind of whimsical stuff. Like people really like that stuff. It seems so simple, but just Apple's point about tapbacks. Most like people love tapbacks. Like it's the wildest thing. So Genmoji tapbacks, like come on, people are gonna be
Even being able
mad.
to send you a birthday card that
Right,
has, your
right,
look-alike instead of a
right.
generic.
Right. People are going to say, "How'd you do that?" And you're like, "Oh, I did it." And they're going to be like, "Well, I can't get that because I don't have the new iPhone." So like this the simplest of things will cause people FOMO for missing out on all of this. So again, no super cycle, but 100% I think some of these things are going to make people be like, "Well, that's cool. I want to do that." So getting a new phone. And maybe the fall phones are just spectacular in redesign and who knows what. So they make all of the cases for this upgrade cycle, but we'll see.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do think though that there's also some future proof in there. We were saying at the beginning, it's not like, people are going into a store and asking for generative AI. That's, the mass market is not there yet. But I do think that Apple has the easiest story to tell because they control the end to end. I wrote about this as I was reflecting on Computext, and and today the story was very simple. We control the AI experience. It's all private. We make it personal to you. We make it contextual, and you make it seamless because it's across all your devices. So there's no complication of what tier of service you have, what you get on this versus that. And then even from a platform perspective, you kind of understand the compute power that is necessary. And so that is M1 and above and iPhone 15 Pro and above.
Yep. Yep. All right. Interesting times. More will be said on this come fall. So look for our thoughts of that. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate your time and send us any comments, thoughts, feedbacks below in the comment section. So have a great day.